Good evening, and welcome to the presentation about an amazing Fairfield figure in history, Mrs. Dr. Rebecca Keck. We will be hearing from the author and the expert in this field very soon, but right now, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what's going on tonight. My name is Dick DeAngelis. I'm a filmmaker and the director of the Fairfield History series. Now, the Fairfield History series is a project that we started about 4 years ago with over 100 volunteers in all kinds of fields, finances and expertise in film, sound, research, all putting together a series of what's going to be 8 films, feature-length documentaries about the history of Fairfield, Iowa and the surrounding area. We've already completed 3 films, award-winning films, and they are Life Before Fairfield, Heroes of Fairfield, and A Place to Grow. Now, since we did that, we started working in the beginning of 2020 on a film called Ahead of Their Time. Ahead of Their Time is about the movers and shakers, the independent thinkers who helped mold Fairfield into the town that it became. In particular, our focus is on the history and growth of business, industry, medicine, finance, etc. And some of the people who really shaped Fairfield either helped it through tough times or helped push it forward to something great. This is a wonderful town, a small town of about 10,000 people in southeastern Iowa. For those of you who are connecting with us in different parts of the country, thank you for joining us. Greta will be joining us in just a minute. Frankly, we've had a few technical difficulties, but our top technical person, Jason Strong, is on top of it. He is an amazing engineer, and he's almost got us totally ready to go. In the meantime, I thought I would tell you a little bit about how we connected with Greta. You see, Greta had written a book already called The Quack's Daughter. And I took an interest because somebody said that the quack she was talking about was not a duck, but rather a woman who was an herbal physician that had herbal remedies from Fairfield, Iowa. So I immediately read the book, which was wonderful. I recommend it to you. And I said, gosh, this is interesting. Of course, most of the attention was on the daughter. But she did tell quite an interesting story about her early life with Rebecca Keck. Now, interestingly, I know a lot of people are saying, what is this Dr. Mrs. Keck? You know, are you being sexist? Well, I'm not, but actually at the time, that was the way that women who were physicians were addressed, with both titles, Mrs. and Doctor. So, I started getting really fascinated by this, and I wanted to know who this author was. So I contacted a woman in Palisades, New York, named Greta Nettleton, and she ended up not only being extremely knowledgeable about this, but also a very nice person, and a person that I just hit it off with right away. And once she told me a little bit about what was going on, I said, oh, did you write a book about Rebecca Keck also? And she goes, no, but it's interesting you say that because I'm writing a book about her. And I said, well, fabulous. I'm doing a movie about movers and shakers in Fairfield, especially in those 1800s. And I'd be interested in possibly including her in on it, but I'd love to learn more. And thus started a fun friendship and a great professional connection between somebody who not only knew about Rebecca Keck, but more importantly to me, she was her great-great-granddaughter. And that meant that from my side, I got a chance to not only see somebody who was a researcher and who'd done the technical work, but actually had a personal connection. And that's where you're going to hear tonight about a really interesting story of how she got started on this and how it continued. I've got to tell you that we've been busy at work the last few days. You see, Greta has been doing interviews with us so that we could take some of this story and put it into our next film. And so far, we've really uncovered a lot of information. As a matter of fact, this afternoon, we took a drive to see the locations of the family business and the family's home. The family home was just on Broadway, on West Broadway Avenue, and the business was only 2 blocks away. So you could kind of get this feeling when you go to visit these areas, even though the buildings aren't there anymore, you start to get the feeling that, wow, they just walked over to work. And that's only about 1.5 blocks away from the town square. We even found out where Rebecca Keck grew up, because she grew up in Fairfield through her teen years. And so Greta will tell you a little bit about that, but we went out to the farm location where her family had some land outside in Fairfield. So it was so much fun to actually go to these places, see what they're like, and find out. Now, I don't want to give too much away, but I will tell you that when you hear this presentation tonight, you're going to see this is a fascinating character, somebody who's really a woman for the modern age, but she was caught up. I was telling Greta, I always think of Katharine Hepburn kind of character when I think of Rebecca Keck, because Dr. Keck, she was an amazing person, very caring, very loving, but also very strong and powerful woman. So I'm excited about this talk, even though I know a lot already. I'm excited about you hearing about this. We'll just be starting in just a minute. We're just finishing to make sure that you can see the pictures that go along with the talk, and it looks like they're just about up. And then we'll go from there. I know that there's already questions coming in, so I'm going to you can join live chat on the Facebook channel. So, do you see viewers like Zoom? I do not.
YouTube.
What did I say?
Facebook.
Oh, I'm sorry. YouTube, which is all of you who are here are on this. You can link to it through Facebook, but it's on YouTube. And Sally says hello. That's good news. So, hi, Sally. We are having a good time here. And she's already checked out the town's best bakeries. I just want you to know that. So, we've had a really interesting time, and we've done tremendous research. This is a challenging time for all of us all around the country, but we've been able to do this. Just so you know, all of us have been masked and keeping proper distance, except for now on the situation. And I'm about 10 feet away from Greta, so I'm not wearing a mask at this point. I do want to encourage you that if you would like to find out more about the Fairfield History Series, you can do so by going to fairfieldhistoryseries.com. And there you can see links to our trailers. You can even download our films and see them. If you're interested in seeing this film, you definitely should see the other ones. I think you would really enjoy them. So it also tells you about some of the progress that we're enjoying already, filming ahead of their time. So we keep you up on things as well. And make sure to like us at Fairfield History Series. Our name of our company is Fairfield Productions, and that's where you'll find us on Facebook. So, all right, well, I've tidied up all my promotional information, and I've told you a little bit about Greta, and I know they're almost to the point where they've got the things ready. We had the connectors, everything was all set. We have 3 different cameras. It's really an elaborate operation. The library, by the way, we're at the Fairfield Public Library. They're a team member on this and a partner, and they've been fabulous to us, allowing us to come in, even through this challenging time, set up and give this presentation to you. So we want to thank them, the people at the Fairfield Public Library, and Rebecca, thanks a lot for all that you've done. You know, one last quick thing, and that is that for those of you who are in Fairfield, you've probably heard of people that some of the great people in Fairfield's history. The story you're going to hear tonight is not necessarily somebody you've heard about a lot. And that's why I'm so excited, because you get a chance to hear a story. You know, when I do these research, we work with Lawrence Iyer, our research director, and so on. One of the things we find is that women aren't well represented in the history books. So we have to dig a little deeper to find those stories. And thank goodness we've had the chance to have Greta here and be able to kind of share stories and understandings. She's been able to get not only resources online, resources in libraries around the country, but also personal resources that have been passed down in her family. And that's what really makes this a very exciting project, is that she's put it all together in such a way that gives us a complete picture of who Rebecca Keck is. And at the same time, Rebecca Keck's not necessarily somebody who we totally understand. So we'll see some of the gaps that we haven't figured out yet. And that's one of the really exciting things here. So I want to see if we can get as close. Are we getting close? Okay. So it may be that we'll have to have a different opportunity to work on this while you hear a little bit from Greta right off the bat. But I think I would like to see if we could at least have Greta speak to us, unless you have some other things you're going to try. No.
No. All right.
So I would love to see, so that I will ask you later, but thank you. Okay, so some of that slideshow may not be happening quite like we expected, but the amazing author and talented personality arriving all the way from the East Coast into the shark-infested waters of Fairfield, Iowa, is here with us tonight. And so we are really thrilled that that she's speaking. As a matter of fact, it shut off? I don't see me on here. Okay.
All right, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Dick, and I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I am really excited to share this amazing story with everybody in the community and with my friends near and far. And I'm here because everyone, I mean everyone, has forgotten who Mrs. Dr. Keck was. And that includes, it's not happening?
Yes, it is now, yes.
Yeah, right. So that includes everyone in her former hometown of Fairfield, and including everyone in my own family. Her great-grandson, my father, never told me a thing about her, and I don't think he knew anything either. So why does she deserve a second shot at history? Well, she was an extraordinary woman who was way ahead of her time, and even more, she was an inspiration to everyone who has had to overcome extreme difficulties in their life. Everything started with a lucky discovery that I made in my family's attic in Connecticut. During a move, I discovered a treasure trove inside some beautiful old leather trunks, which were filled with artifacts inherited from these Fairfield ancestors. Researching this project was like taking a time machine trip into the journey back into a lost world. My great-great-grandmother was born in 1838 in Ohio, and she had a career as a physician in Iowa and Illinois from the mid-1860s until she retired in 1900. But there was a lot more than that to her story. I discovered a 4-page flyer from 1893 in one of the trunks. It was covered with fancy Victorian lettering in huge fonts and typefaces, and it had a huge engraving of a giant Victorian house, which was advertised as Dr. Mrs. Keck's Medical Infirmary. Sometimes she was Mrs. Dr. Keck, sometimes she was Dr. Mrs. Keck. And she also spelled her last name several ways. So Ilgen Fritz, spelled many ways. So here was this flyer. I didn't know what to think about it. No one in my family knew anything about her. I quickly discovered with some online research that this woman was a once famous 19th century medical entrepreneur who was widely accused of being a quack. I immediately set out to find out if these fierce accusations were really true. Was she a crook? What kind of person was she? It turns out that she was considered in her time to be the greatest female physician in the West. She was second only to Lydia Pinkham as the most successful woman in the patent medicine business in 19th century America. She was described in multiple editorial endorsements that ran in scores of newspapers all over the Midwest as a greater celebrity than any female physician in the West. In 1882, she said she had treated between 12,000 and 15,000 patients over the previous decade, scattered across Iowa, central Illinois, and Wisconsin, and Minnesota. I found out all the details because she ran tens of thousands of advertisements in scores of newspapers for 30 years, from about 1870 to 1900. And many of these newspapers have been digitalized, so it was possible for me to find out an amazing amount of information about her career. My great-great-grandparents, Rebecca Ilgen Fritz and John Keck, were Pennsylvania Dutch. They're descended from German religious refugees whose modern descendants include Amish and Mennonites. They assimilated with English-speaking people as their pioneer parents migrated west through Ohio, Illinois, and Iowa, and they became devout Methodists somewhere along the way. They arrived separately in Jefferson County, Iowa in the 1850s. Rebecca came to Fairfield with her parents in 1851 at the age of 13. Her parents, Jacob and Elizabeth, bought a small farm of 40 acres on the edge of Fairfield Center Township, and they struggled to earn a living. It wasn't a good farm. It sold for only $10 an acre, and in those days, a good farm sold for about $150 an acre. So the problems with it, they might not have had a good woodlot. It might have been swampy, because frankly, the soil in Fairfield, Iowa, is world famous as being among the most fertile and the most favorable for farming that you could find pretty much anywhere. So their problems increased because they were plagued by disease. And Rebecca lost 3 older brothers and a younger sister to tuberculosis. Regular doctors were helpless to treat tuberculosis in the 19th century, and it killed 3/4 of its victims. These challenges led Rebecca to fight back against death. And she and her mother worked on all kinds of remedies and tended to their own health problems and those of their neighbors. So when Rebecca was 19, she met her husband, John Keck, who just arrived in town, and they got married a few months later. So it was obviously a quick love match, and they were happily married all their for both their lives, for their entire lives. All 19th century pioneer women were expected to provide the bulk of health care for their families for no pay. Everyone really respected them for that. Isolated and courageous women often became medical authorities in their families and settlements. They learned their skills from their relatives and from their own experience, which was called empiricism. And we think of empiricism as a scientific concept, but in those days, it was looked down on, especially if it's connected to medicine. Rebecca's 4th daughter, Cora, was my great-grandmother. Cora was born on May 3rd, 1865 at home, and she was probably delivered by Fairfield's Quaker midwife, whose name was Rachel Pierce. Over her lifetime, Mrs. Pierce delivered 1,000 children to Fairfield mothers without a single fatality, according to well-documented information, which is in the Journal of the Iowa State Medical Society. That was quite a record. Rebecca learned about common medicinal herbs during her childhood in Wayne County, Ohio, and later when she came to Fairfield, Iowa as a teenager. She would have gone simpling, as it was called, which was going out into the fields to collect herbs on a beautiful day with your friends. And she would have gone with her mother and other relatives who knew what to look for, when and where, and what to do with it afterwards. I have pictures of 2 useful herbs she would have known about that I can find in my own front yard, witch hazel and dockweed. Fairfield's Dr. Joshua Schaefer, a physician as well as a patent attorney and the secretary of the Iowa Agricultural Association, grew medicinal herbs in his garden too. He also mixed up herbal remedies from his mother's recipes. So the regular doctors and the women and housewives, everyone used herbal remedies in those days, as well as the other more toxic remedies that were restricted just to the doctors. So the toxic remedies were a big deal. Sweat, bleed, purge, and puke. Doctors of the 1830s and 1840s were trained using ancient Greek theories. And the toxic and grueling treatments were called heroic treatments. And they were heroic because the patients had to have heroic endurance to live through them. Medicine was pre-scientific at best. Science played no part in medical training, and most doctors had no more than 4 months at a for-profit medical school before they hung up their shingle to practice. They carried bags packed full of purgatives and emetics that contained mercury, antimony, vitriol, cyanide, opium, ricin, strychnine, and belladonna. The patients, regrettably, often died from the spectacular side effects of these treatments. Many people sought out alternative ways to treat illness. So, unlike the regular medical schools, alternative medical schools sometimes allowed women to enroll as medical students. And women played a powerful role in the spread of alternative medical practices, such as homeopathy and Thompsonian and physiomedical herbal medications. So during this same era, doctors were threatened by political changes in the United States. Regular doctors started the American Medical Association in 1847 after a wave of populism swept the country. Voters everywhere demanded that the government deregulate the professions of medicine and law. Every single law regarding medical credentials and medical education was eventually rolled back in every state, and even at the national, and there was nothing at the national level. And this was done to popular acclaim. Hooray! Now everyone can legally, anybody who wants to, can legally declare themselves to be a physician. As a result, during most of the 19th century, the free market shaped American medical care from top to bottom. Unfortunately, profit-driven medical education sank to a low level, and the wide open marketplace encouraged swarms of con men who sold snake oil and left town immediately thereafter. The regular physicians fought back vigorously, and they drew a charmed line that excluded all unprofessional doctors to separate them from their brotherhood. And that's the charmed line I refer to in the title of the book I'm working on. And the line, in blunt terms, that line separates good things from bad things. And it's a definition that can change over time, depending on what people think. So in those days, the doctors lumped the competing irregular medical practitioners in with the quack swindlers, and they didn't believe that they were sincere. And they also lumped a lot of women healers and midwives together with the quacks. So it's useful to reframe what these women were doing. They were not quacks or empirics, but they were practitioners of folk medicine. And Rebecca Keck is one of the very few of these folk medicine practitioners whose accomplishments can be traced historically. Small rural businesses flourished in Iowa's towns after the Civil War. Rebecca's husband, John Keck, started a foundry, an inventor's workshop, and it took off. In 1860, he only had $1,500 in property. By 1870, he had increased his wealth 10 times to over $15,000. Rebecca honed her business skills behind the scenes while helping the Keck foundry profits to increase 10 times in less than 10 years. By 1871, John Keck employed 15 men and was the second largest farm equipment manufacturer in Fairfield. His machinery won recognition and prizes year after year for its excellence at the county fair and at the state fair. He sold dozens of threshing machines for $600 apiece to wealthy farmers all over the counties. 1871 was the high point of his career. His company was bigger than William Loudon's. The Keck family was riding high when a new railroad line came through Fairfield in 1872, and they started shipping in cheaper threshers built by the huge Eastern manufacturers in Chicago and Moline. This competition practically bankrupted the Keck foundry. Other Fairfield manufacturers like Loudon were quicker to respond, and they became factory dealers for McCormick, Deere, Plano, International Harvester, and others. This crisis was a turning point in Rebecca's life. She was forced to take over as a family breadwinner, and she turned to the treatments and sickroom protocols that she had developed while nursing her family through various illnesses. She began to charge money for the tonics and medical advice that formerly she had given to everybody for free. And thus, she began to run into serious trouble. Not because she didn't know what she was doing, but because she was charging money for it and earning a lot. John Keck believed in his wife's talents and supported her business ambitions. He partnered with a wealthy miller in Fairfield named Franklin Hunsinger, and the two men opened a small patent medicine laboratory in 1872 in Fairfield and began to market a catarrh remedy under John Keck's name. A 19th century catarrh remedy would have been similar to a modern soothing cough syrup and decongestant. We can be certain that Rebecca suggested this plan and was involved with putting it into action. Behind the scenes, Midwestern propriety of that day required that a woman not have her name in public in the press. She had to be hidden behind her husband's name. So the first kind of patent medicine that they were marketing under her husband's name didn't go anywhere. And they had a partnership with various people in Fairfield, and the guy who made an ad, it had misprints in it, and just nothing was going right. And but they did get a small patent medicine laboratory going, and they probably used some of the Keck family property. They cleaned up one of the workshops and installed the equipment and bottling equipment and mixing equipment, and they started making crates of bottles that could be sold. So, but they weren't having much luck selling it. They had trouble with the sales force.
Wait, we're gonna take. So, this is when we are going to have a little break to give our author a chance to have a little drink of water. And I'm here to tell you, my name is Dick DeAngelis. Thank you for joining us. I want to congratulate a few people. Don't have pictures right now because of me. There's been a little bit of a glitch. So Greta is here giving you her talk, which usually is accompanied by some beautiful pictures that she took a long time to put together. Unfortunately, right now, they're not here. We're still trying to put that together, by the way, and I want to apologize also to our engineer, Jason Strong, because I didn't give him what I needed to give him. So please blame me for this little problem that we're having. But in the meantime, I thought I would just take a minute and tell you how exciting the story is so far. I feel like I'm a little bit in vaudeville, and there's a little break in the presentation, and I'm coming out and doing the dog and pony act. But I want to tell you that I truly am excited about this. Can you imagine this little girl, 13 years old, taking classes here in Fairfield, being a part of the community, and all of a sudden she starts just building this audience of patients that love what she's doing for them by having this knowledge of herbal treatments, etc., that she most probably learned from her parents and their parents. And she takes what we consider today kind of new, I think some people might call it even new age or whatever, but some kind of new herbal treatments that now people even are very excited about in today's world. Well, this lady was saying, hey, these natural ways, there's something to them, especially based on what they've got as an alternative, right? And so she starts to put this together, starts to do it as a business because her husband is in business. He starts taking it over. That's the way it was done. And then you see this switch, and that's what I'm excited about hearing about now. You see this switch because Rebecca Keck decides that, wait a minute, this thing is not swimming along as well as I thought it would. And guess what? It's probably not, because I'm the one that's behind this thing. I'm the one that really makes I'm a baseball fan. There's a great baseball player that once said, I'm the straw that stirs the drink. Well, I see Rebecca Keck as the straw that stirred the drink. And so anyway, I'm excited about hearing more about this. We'll be connecting with you just in a minute. I want to tell you one other quick story. So we actually have contacted someone here in Fairfield who is Mike Burgraff, who helped us locate a Keck tonic bottle. And Jason took the time to photograph it. Very exciting, because we actually have this picture. We might even down the road be able to show it to you, who knows. But it's really an exciting thing. By the way, if we can't, you're getting a chance to hear this live. You'll be able to ask questions, by the way, on the YouTube page that you're looking at. If you ask questions, we will get them to Greta and be able to ask her these questions. So please feel free to join in the conversation. It is amazing to see Greta present. I totally agree with you. Mindwell? Is that
Mindy.
correct?
Oh, Mindy.
Mindy. Hi, Mindy. Thanks for chiming in, and it's really great to have her here, honestly. I'm really honored, and we all are. She's really has deep knowledge about this. When she tells you these stories, this is not something that she just can look up, on Google it and find out. The amount of research she's doing, the deep research she's doing, is really fabulous. And it really is. I'm excited about the book that's going to come out, because I think it's going to reflect that. And her giving these presentations and so on, I think will reflect as she starts to refine how she wants to tell this story. It's a pretty exciting type of thing. And all I'm suggesting to you is, whether or not we get the pictures up or not right now, you can always come back to this talk on YouTube at Fairfield Media Center's YouTube page, and you can see the pictures that Jason will then edit into the presentation. And oh no, we're not doing that. We're not recording. I'm sorry. Well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure out somehow to get you this. But there'll be a lot of pictures in the book, I can tell you that. And I'm thrilled about this, because we will get a chance to hear the rest of the story about Rebecca Keck in just a second. But are there any other questions anybody has before we do that we might be able to tell you? Glenda White asks, is Rebecca related to the Kecks in Stockport? Did you know that there's a Keck family in Stockport, Iowa, right near? Yeah, there is. Well, we're going to have to do some research on that. Thank you, Glenda, for asking that. I will definitely pass it on. We don't believe so, but we don't know, and we can always check. One of the things that I just wanted to say is, to me, the thrill is the thrill of having the author here with us. And I just want to take a second and thank Greta for coming here, dealing with all the kind of situations that she deals with, to have, like the one that we're dealing with tonight, and still being so helpful to us in our production to be able to put this all together. So thank you for doing this. We want to hear the rest of the story. So whenever we're ready for part 2 of the story of Dr. Mrs. Keck.
Okay. Well, it's actually an appropriate crisis. Mrs. Dr. Keck specialized in handling crises, and she was unbelievable in her ability to handle one terrible thing after another, and not only survive the terrible things, but then also to continue to advance herself and her career in a calm and ladylike way and make friends wherever she went. So it's just unbelievable how she could handle pressure and how she could solve problems. So that was one of her greatest skills. So the first problem is, okay, her husband's company's gone broke. The second problem is, in September of '73, there's a national banking panic which set off the greatest financial depression of the 19th century, equivalent to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So the chances of her new patent medicines being sold from this laboratory were sinking fast. And the country was in crisis. Reconstruction meant there were armed occupiers all over the South. The grasshoppers were eating all the curtains out of the windows right down to the fence posts in northwest Iowa. 1873 was a really rough year. So at that very moment, she took a case of bottles onto a steamship in Burlington, Iowa, and steamed north to Dubuque, walked into the office of the Dubuque Herald, and secured an advertisement on the front page and said, "Today's advertisements, catarrh cured Mrs. Dr. Keck of Fairfield, Iowa, makes catarrh and its ills a specialty." So this is the first time that she put her own name in print into these ads, and she courageously just took up the burden of supporting her 6 children and her husband, and surviving a national depression, and keeping everything together and looking calm and friendly while all this was happening. So meanwhile, the Kecks found a new partner to help run the patent medicine factory. So they were lucky there, and it was a man named Henry B. Mitchell. And he was one of the most prominent citizens in Fairfield, and his maid, Molly Patrick, had been one of Rebecca's patients. And so he must have been convinced that she had a good product. So unfortunately, John Keck's foundry collapsed completely the following year in 1874. Revenues went to zero, and it was sold to a competitor. So Rebecca had to take full control of her new enterprise at this point. And she signed all the contracts, controlled her business model herself, and she was able to do all this thanks to a legal reform called the Married Woman's Property Act of January 1873. This was only in Iowa. In many other states, particularly in the South, English common law did not permit a married woman to have a financial or legal identity separate from her husband's. So women could not run businesses unless they were single. So Iowa was a radically progressive state in many ways, and they had missed implementing women's suffrage in Iowa by single vote 2 years earlier. So she needed all the help she could get to continue her expansion, and she was a devout Methodist, and she got a lot of help from the Methodist Church, which was also a very progressive organization and favored working women. And as her success increased, many people became jealous and turned against her. So on July 9th, 1874, she went to Decatur to sell her remedies, and she was arrested on the street. Although her remedies were made of herbs, they were macerated in alcohol. So strictly speaking, they were probably like 50 proof or more. She was a strict Methodist temperance advocate and a non-drinker, but these alcoholic tonics were very alcoholic, and the city fathers of Decatur decided to have her arrested for selling liquor without a license. They threw her into prison, where she shared a cell with Madam Davis, who was the proprietor of the Idlewild brothel. And Madam Davis had just been thrown into jail because she pulled a pearl-handled revolver on the chief of police and tried to shoot him in the stomach while she was being arrested. So Mrs. Dr. Keck started meeting some very interesting new people as part of her work experience. Madam Davis was fined over $3,000 and sentenced to 300 days in jail. And Rebecca Keck got off easily with a $25 fine. As she left town, she vowed she would get even with the Decatur city government someday. So Dick mentioned earlier that a local collector has one of Mrs. Dr. Keck's bottles, and it's a beautiful thing. They're quite valuable because they're quite rare, and unfortunately the labels are long gone, and so we have no way of knowing what the ingredients were on these wonderful tonics. And it's a mystery we'll probably never be able to solve. Somehow, she knew how to reduce inflammation and chronic infections. And this was in an era before anyone had antibiotics, so it was a very valuable skill. There was nothing else available. So her story resembles Lydia Pinkham and her famous vegetable compound. Lydia Pinkham's herbal tonic was also very alcoholic, and several bawdy Harvard undergraduate songs were composed in its praise. Like Rebecca Keck, Lydia Pinkham was a temperance advocate. So it's very clear at this exact moment in 1875 that Rebecca was a marketing genius. 1 year after taking charge of the shabby little patent medicine factory in the corner of her husband's bankrupt foundry, and working from a relatively small town, a small platform, she launched herself on the road to great wealth. She advertised heavily, she established strong relationships with patients and supporters, and she started working in Davenport, which was a bigger city near Fairfield. By April 1875, she'd earned enough money to buy property there and set up an infirmary so that patients who needed extra attention could come there and stay. And I just want people to remember that in the 1870s, there really were no hospitals anywhere. The few hospitals that existed were places of great despair and dirt and filth, and it's where you went if you were too poor to pay for a doctor to come to your house. So an infirmary was a different kind of thing. It was small, and it was run privately, and you had to pay. And so that's what she set up. She took a short break after advertising heavily and visiting Dubuque a number of times. And then she launched herself into the big time and went to Chicago. And she was so successful in Chicago, where she rented rooms on Madison Street, that she stayed for 3 weeks. So all this money started pouring in, and she was advertising herself as a professional and as a woman under her own name. And because of this, she seems to have made a lot of enemies among the regular doctors in Fairfield. She was the only woman who dared to call herself a physician in the county, and her financial success was shocking to the medical establishment. Gossip flared up around her. It must have been very painful. Rebecca pushed back and electrified the whole town of Fairfield by wearing bloomers in the town square. And I have a picture of my slideshow showing Calamity Jane wearing bloomers in one picture, and then the Civil War surgeon Dr. Mary Walker, wearing these beautifully tailored silk pants with a military stripe in the other picture. But we have no idea what Rebecca's bloomers looked like. So we'll just have to imagine that it was shocking to people in that time. It would be like walking around naked is today. So Fairfield's most venerable physician, Dr. J. Frederick Clark, who was later a vice president of the Iowa State Medical Society, recorded the daring display 60 years later. "The doctor remembers," he wrote, "as a boy, the sensation in Fairfield when Dr. Keck appeared in bloomers." So, and he advertised 3 different times in the Ledger for somebody who remembered anything more about this incident. He couldn't get these bloomers out of his head. And so it was, at its time, a real political statement. So after this defiant gesture, Rebecca Keck stopped advertising in Fairfield in October, and she pulled up stakes and moved her whole family to Davenport in December. So they went to live in the infirmary building on Brady Street. And she and her husband also broke off their partnership with Henry B. Mitchell at that time. And so it was really, unfortunately, she kind of burned her bridges with the bloomer demonstration. So, but I did want to say that Fairfield was where she grew to adulthood, where she went to school, where she raised her 6 children, and where she met her husband. And it provided her with an excellent launch pad for her large ambitions. So she moved to Davenport, which was a huge railroad hub 100 miles west of Chicago. And she got a lot of good public testimonials from prominent citizens. And she got a listing as a physician in the Davenport Business Directory. And there were 30 doctors in the list, and it included several women. So clearly Davenport was a more liberal place for women physicians than Fairfield had been. So there were, in particular, there were 3 women doctors in Davenport of great note. Dr. Margaret Cleaves, who was in the first class to graduate from the University of Iowa Medical School, went on to write a famous book about neurasthenia, and she had an international career. And Dr. Delilah Irish, who was one of the earliest graduates of the Women's Medical College of Philadelphia, studied with the Blackwell sisters in New York, and she was a very fine doctor. And she and also Jenny McCowan, these 3 women were immediately admitted to the Scott County Medical Society and were greatly respected. So unfortunately, Mrs. Dr. Keck was an outsider. And she was on the wrong side of the charmed line, and she was not popular with the regular physicians, even and particularly the women physicians, who felt very threatened because their own status was so fragile. So John and Rebecca Keck's 2 oldest daughters, Belle Alexander and Lotta Keck, well, Belle's married name was Alexander, Belle and Lotta, were key executives in running the business. Belle began buying and managing property by the age of 29, and throughout her life, she purchased large amounts of property in Chicago's South Side around Jackson Park, which was in those days the future World's Fair site, and she acted as her mother's agent for investing all the family fortunes. She also had a keen taste for litigation and diamond jewelry. She also probably handled the bulk of Mrs. Dr. Keck's enormous advertising schedule. Charlotte, or Lotta, was more of a people person, and she began managing Mrs. Dr. Keck's semi-permanent branch office in Peoria, Illinois, at the age of 19 or 20, and she later served as her mother's business manager. Rebecca Keck expanded her practice into Bloomington, Illinois in 1877. She established a long-standing business relationship that later blossomed into a close friendship with a wealthy patent medicine magnate in Bloomington named Dr. Cyrenius Wakefield. He was one of the founders of the Republican Party, a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, and a wealthy man who also owned a Bloomington newspaper, the Pantagraph, which is still in business. The Wakefield children became close friends with Rebecca Keck's daughter, Cora, my great-grandmother. After the laboratory in Fairfield fell by the wayside and the relationship with Henry B. Mitchell was ruptured, the large Wakefield laboratory and shipping facilities in Bloomington played an important role in Mrs. Dr. Keck's growing mail-order business. Rebecca Keck's husband, John, listed himself in Davenport in 1877 in the business directory as a physician, which is quite a leap from his earlier role as an inventor and foundry owner. He invented a hemorrhoid remedy and sometimes supervised his wife's infirmary and medical office while she was away. He also took over family duties and in a very modern way raised the younger children. According to the 1880 federal census, Rebecca listed herself as a physician and John listed himself as keeping house. His wife was very seldom home. She traveled a regular circuit in Iowa and central Illinois, making regular bi-monthly visits to rented rooms in hotels and seeing her patients and diagnosing and handing out treatments. She saw hundreds of patients during each visit, which would last for 1 or 2 weeks, and she saw as many as 30 or 40 people per day. Office visits were free, but patients had to pay $1 per bottle throughout their treatments, and treatments could last for months. So she also answered the inquiries that came to her by mail from rural people at a distance. So in 1879, just 5 years after her husband's total financial collapse, Mrs. Dr. Keck shocked everyone in Davenport when she purchased the former John P. Cook mansion at 611 Brady Street for $12,000 in cash. That's equivalent to $1.5 million in today's money. Rebecca had established, by making this real estate purchase, she was establishing a permanent headquarters, a flagship for her business, and it became the symbol in all her advertising. Her allies in the Davenport newspapers proclaimed her purchase to be a local triumph. The doctors of the Scott County Medical Society were outraged. Like a large fraction of all doctors practicing in the deregulated America of the 1870s, Mrs. Dr. Keck had no formal medical training or credentials. However, in 1877, Illinois was among the very first states in the country to reestablish medical regulation. After the Medical Practices Act was passed, a forceful public health expert took charge of the newly created State Board of Health. In 1878, Dr. Rauch, the board secretary, targeted Mrs. Dr. Keck as his first test case for the new regulations. To his dismay, he discovered that she was a very resolute opponent. He fumed in the Chicago Tribune that Mrs. Dr. Keck was foul and damnable in every way. So once again, Mrs. Dr. Keck was arrested on the sidewalk, this time in Peoria, in April of 1880. So she was walking from the railroad station to her office with her daughter Lotta, and she was publicly handcuffed. The news made the police blotter of the Chicago Tribune. He meant to have her publicly humiliated. As Dr. Rauch's test case, she was charged with practicing medicine without a license. And the local doctor named Dr. O.B. Will, an ambitious young gynecologist, brought the charges. He was the only doctor in the Peoria Medical Society who was willing to confront her. She hired a well-connected lawyer and sued Dr. Will in revenge for $10,000 for trespass on her lease. After her arrest in Peoria, Mrs. Dr. Keck was locked out of the advertising pages of many newspapers for most of 1880. Her friendship with powerful newspaper editors in Davenport, Peoria, Bloomington, Quincy, Rock Island, and other places were key in her survival. All of these men wrote ringing endorsements of her and her practice and her right to be a physician. Her infirmary is one of our institutions, declared the Davenport Gazette, adding that her reputation has been built solely by merit. The Peorian wrote, "A name so well known in central Illinois as to have become a household word in hundreds of families due to her celebrity as a physician and good name as a citizen." And she collected all of these recommendations and put them into her ads. And you can see that this is just a printout of one section of the praise that she received. So this isn't just testimonials from her patients. This is from prominent people who felt that she was really worthwhile and that she was bringing something good to society and that she had a right to continue to practice. Okay, so she had all this support. She ran into more trouble. She tried to go back to Decatur, and I have this great political cartoon, which unfortunately I can't show. And so she was, the one place she faced defeat was in Decatur. And she sent her daughter to Vassar, and that story is told in my other book, The Quack's Daughter. And she was arrested a third time in Champaign, Illinois, went to jail, paid her bail, came out, hired the same fantastic lawyer, and got involved in a long lawsuit in Champaign, which went on for 3 years, and eventually the jury found her innocent. So her daughter graduated from Vassar and played a wonderful concert, and her parents went east to visit, and that was the first vacation that Rebecca Keck had had since she undertook to become a well-known businesswoman and physician. And finally, in 1886, the state of Iowa, with its brand new health Board of Health, issued her a State of Iowa Physician Certificate, number 1212. And so she became officially a real physician at that time, by virtue of having practiced in the state for more than 15 years. So Cora eloped and had one child, who was my grandmother, Charlotte, also named Charlotte after Lotta Keck. And through this, Cora kept a baby diary. And I finally discovered proof of Mrs. Dr. Keck's medical abilities because Cora recorded every detail of a dramatic cure in little Charlotte Cook's baby diary. And there's this beautiful portrait of Mrs. Dr. Keck with Charlotte on her shoulder, and it commemorates the happy fact that Rebecca Keck saved her granddaughter's life. And it's very clearly described, and it's a very dramatic incident. So that will be in my book. And so in closing, I just want to say that she was a great inspiration to me as I studied her story, because I saw how she took charge. She didn't let misfortune sink her heart. Her courage was great, and she was practical and wasn't afraid to handle money. She wasn't afraid to be aggressive in business, and these things saved her family from bankruptcy, and at the same time, she managed to become extremely well-liked and kind of a beacon for women's rights. And many of the editors said she was a model for women all over America. And I think it's really sad that her story got lost somehow because, you know, it's not easy to fight with the doctors. I like doctors. I mean, nobody wants to be against the doctors, but they were really mad. And I think the scandal connected with her conflict with the medical profession is probably one of the main reasons why no one's ever heard of her. But so in closing, I just want to say that thank you very much for coming. And don't forget to go to the University of Iowa Press webpage. Check out my other book. It's also available on Amazon. And you can just Google my name, and all those links will come up. So thanks very much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Greta, thank you very much. I am going to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
And so I know there's a few things that you cut short, but I think that it's okay. I think one of the most exciting things for me is that this story is resurfacing and that you're able to share it with us. And even though we didn't have all the beautiful graphics that we would like to have, you did a great job of telling that story. And I can tell, because all the people that joined us, almost every one of them is still here at the end of your talk.
You're
And
kidding.
that tells you something
Oh,
good.
my gosh.
So first, we do want to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to stay with just maybe about 5 or 10 minutes and ask Greta a few questions. By the way, one of the questions that I got asked was, why are you mispronouncing her name? It's Greta, it's Greta. And I said, and the answer is no, it's Greta. And so just wanted to let you know, I found out right from the boss. And she was saying to do a search, you can find her name on the YouTube page that we're on right now. So I was going to ask you a question. I'm amazed about this story that you and I talked about the infirmary. And I'm wondering if you can share, because this was a very nice building. And but it looks magnificent in the ads that you've shown me that she put out. And you shared a few things about that, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little more about those ads and what she did with the building to make it look even a little better.
Well, that's a really great question, because that building was iconic in Davenport, and it was originally built in 1857 by one of Davenport's most prominent citizens, whose name, ironically, John Cook, was the same as my great-grandfather's, but they were totally not related. And John Cook was the grandfather-in-law of a famous author named Susan Glaspell, who was from Davenport. And she wrote a description of that house, and she said she hated it because it was an ultimate kind of expression of, grotesque expenditure and bad taste by rich people. So to us, looking back in time, it looks pretty restrained. It was a big square brick house with triangular roofs like a Greek temple and a little cupola in the middle, and it had a small barn out back. And by modern standards, it's actually kind of modest looking, but for frontier people to see that it was considered a mansion at the time it was built. Okay, so this is to start.
Yeah.
All right, I got a lot to say about this house. So then in about 6 months after he built the house for $57,000, in those days, that's like $57 million in modern time. I mean, it's just outrageously expensive. And he lost everything in the crash of '57, and he went totally bankrupt. And the house fell into the hands of creditors, and nobody wanted it because it was somebody else's dream house. And so it was just rented out to doctors. So it was being rented out to the secretary of the Scott County Medical Society, who was named Dr. Hazen, and he ran his infirmary in that building. And he also treated catarrh because he was an eye, ear, nose, and throat guy. So Mrs. Dr. Keck's office was right next door. And every day she looked up at that building and she thought, infirmary, that's the infirmary I want. And so she kept her ear to the ground, and the creditors in Boston who owned the building decided to get rid of it, and they put it up for sale. And she got wind of it before anyone else. And she went in and put down money and made an offer. And then the agent said, oh, we're not going to sell it for that. We're going to sell it for, she offered, let's say, $100. And he said, no, we're going to offer it for $200. So just make up those fake numbers. So she said, okay, fine, I'm going to Peoria. And I'm going to buy this other mansion that belongs to a celebrity lecturer named Ingersoll. And that was, he was as famous as, like a movie star or something today. He was very well known nationally. So she was going to go to Peoria and buy his house. And that made the news all over. And then the agent in Davenport heard, and he thought he'd lost his sale. And he rushed back and he said, oh, no, I'm lowering my price. You can have that building. And so she sealed the deal, and she got the building that it cost $57,000 to build for $12,000. So it was quite the bargain. And then she sold her property on Brady Street that she owned before at a profit to the same creditors she bought the mansion from. So she made money coming and going. So she was very, very adept at business. And so that was like pretty much a triumph and a scandal, and it made it into the lists in the town history, along with the boiler explosion, steamship crashes, bridge falling down, fires on the waterfront, and Mrs. Dr. Keck buys the John Cook house. So it was another scandal like the Bloomers.
Well, thanks for that. I know that to me, it really tells you something about her. By the way, people are chiming in. Thank you, and really appreciate the show, and enjoy so much the history of Fairfield. Greta, thanks for sharing your experience. And then also, someone asked which railroad, Rock Island or Burlington Northern, and where on Brady Street. So those are just two little details that were asked. So which railroad, I think, has to do with the railroad that came to Fairfield.
Yeah.
And that put John a little bit out of business. And I'm guessing that that's the one that went north-south. Of course, it wasn't the CB&Q. So I'm guessing it would be the one that came from the stockyards and came through from Chicago that way. I may be wrong, and I would love, if you have anything to add to that, Glenda, in terms of what you think. I will do more research on what railroad came at that year, because certainly it's in my notes. I wish Lawrence was here, but he's not. So
yeah, I was afraid to say, because I know there's local experts who will know exactly.
Yeah, we'll get that for you.
The main point, though, is with two railroads, they immediately engaged in a price war, and the cost of shipping things in probably went down dramatically. I didn't see any numbers in the paper, but I'm sure that was the reason.
Well, the other thing that we were saying is that first railroad was a huge boon to Fairfield, because it got them to be able to get their products out. But the second railroad, I think, ended up becoming, don't forget, this also was post-Chicago fire, and you were saying one of his major competitors rebuilt.
Yes, in 1871, the McCormick factory burned to the ground. So that was Keck's best year, because you couldn't buy a thresher from Chicago because they were dealing with the fire. And then, of course, the next year, McCormick was back in business, and then the second railroad came through. And the second railroad was great for the farmers, because then their shipping costs were really low. But it was devastating for local manufacturers, who then had to compete against everyone in the nation.
Kind of a comparable situation would be when Walmart started up, and all of a sudden small stores had to compete with products that were made overseas at much lower prices.
I guess
it's
so.
kind of
a
something
little bit
like that.
Yeah.
So something maybe we could relate to that way. I do think it's interesting. One of the people I'm studying is William Loudon, and Loudon had to really scramble during that time. Actually, his business was not doing as well as Kecks at the time, but then he had to shuffle, had to sell other products.
Well, he did really well, because he became a middleman, and he was the dealer, the local dealer for the big manufacturers.
Well,
so
he
that
kept
was the
in
way
business,
to handle it.
but he wasn't doing great business, and we'll talk about that at another time. But Loudon had to totally restructure his business with the help of his brother. He did, and they had to kind of do a restart themselves to get their business really taking off. Keep William Loudon, who is really the inventor, inventing and dealing with product development, and have his brother, who is the lawyer, deal with the business side of it. One of the things that really is interesting regarding Rebecca is that it seems like she was doing a lot of business work, possibly for John, early on. You were telling me,
Yeah.
and that I think in some ways maybe honing her skills and giving her confidence to say, wait a minute, I can do this whole thing. I really have the ability. And I think for women at that time, women today, I know there's really deep inequities for women today. But in those days, women not only had inequities, but they had really a huge uphill battle because it just wasn't done. I think the best thing you told me to really understand that, Greta, was as long as women weren't charging for their services in herbal preparations and tonics, they were fine. They didn't make anybody uncomfortable. As soon as they started making money, then the powers that be didn't like that at all. Not even the men, even some of the women didn't like it. And then they really had she had an uphill battle. I would have loved to have met her. I think she must have been a powerful, exciting woman.
Charismatic and amazing. And to me, what's amazing is the mixture that she was patient and kind and listened to people. She obviously, patients adored going to talk to her. And maybe there's a little bit of psychiatric help too, because people with chronic diseases are always stressed and depressed. And so she had some magic combination of how to talk to people. And she tried to, other people tried to do what she was doing and no one else could do it. So it's really her personality. And then on a closing note, I want to say that not all the men were against her, and these people who admired her said amazing things. The Bloomington leader said she was plucky and indomitable and the victim of malignant and unjustifiable abuse from the regular male profession, and more than a match for her enemies. And I don't think in today's press do you ever hear anybody defending strong women that way. And here's what the Daily Peorian said about her, that she is a subject for congratulation among the women of America, a forcible illustration of the ability of women to succeed in all avenues of professional or public life. So a lot of guys were really all in on women's rights in the Midwest. And I think that we forget. It wasn't a monolith. Some guys were against it, and some guys were for it. And they spoke up. And so I think that's a really lovely thing.
Well, speaking of a really lovely thing, this evening, with all its technical challenges, have been fabulous. We really enjoyed your presentation. We thank you for being with us. We thank you for staying with us. All of the people that stayed with us, really, what a great group. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to talking to you some more and letting you know more about the Fairfield History series, and as well, we'll keep you up on Greta's book, because that'll be exciting. Maybe, if we get really fortunate, they'll both get released at the same time, and when you come see the film, you'll be able to purchase a book too, because it'll be really a great way to celebrate the amazing life of Dr. and Mrs. Keck. All right, well, thank you very much. This is Dick DeAngelis. Thanks to the Fairfield Media Center, the Fairfield Public Library, and of course, our guest, Greta Nettleton. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dick.
All right.